Here's the truth most men don't understand. A woman doesn't leave because she loses feelings. She leaves because attraction drops. And attraction drops when you lose control of your value. And the same woman who walks away can come back if the attraction is still alive beneath the surface. But attraction isn't loud. It doesn't always show up as obvious flirting. Sometimes it hides in subtle behaviors most men completely miss. Let's break down the signs she's attracted to you, even if she never says it. When a woman is attracted to you, she doesn't always express it directly. Instead, she finds subtle ways to stay in your space without making it obvious. One of the clearest signs is that she creates reasons to keep the connection going even when there's no real need to. This doesn't always look like constant texting or obvious effort. In fact, it's often the opposite. She might send something small, like a random question she could have easily Googled, or bring up a topic that doesn't really require your input. The point isn't the conversation itself, it's maintaining a presence in your life. You'll notice she keeps interactions open-ended. Instead of giving short, closed replies, she adds something extra that gives you a reason to respond. Even when a conversation naturally reaches a point where it could end, she extends it just enough to keep it alive. That's intentional, even if she's not consciously aware of it. Another pattern is timing. She may reach out at moments that seem random, but are actually driven by impulse. When something reminds her of you, when she's bored, or when she feels your absence. These small check-ins are less about information and more about emotional connection. A lot of men misunderstand this and assume that if she's not putting in obvious effort, she's not interested. But attraction doesn't always show up as intensity. Sometimes it shows up as consistency in small actions. If she keeps finding her way back into conversation with you, that's investment. You might also notice that she brings up past conversations or inside jokes. That's another way of reinforcing the connection. She's signaling that your interactions matter enough for her to remember and revisit them. The mistake many men make here is overvaluing the content of what she says, instead of recognizing the intent behind it. They focus on what she's texting rather than why she's texting. When you shift your perspective, you start to see that the effort isn't always loud. It's strategic and subtle. If she's consistently finding small, indirect reasons to engage with you, it means she's keeping the emotional door open. When a woman is attracted to you, she will often test your confidence, not to push you away, but to understand who you really are under pressure. These tests are rarely obvious. They show up in small moments. Teasing, challenging your opinions, or saying something slightly provocative just to see how you respond. For example, she might joke about you, question your decisions, or disagree with something you say even when it's not a big deal. On the surface, it can feel like she's being difficult or uninterested. In reality, she's observing your emotional stability. She wants to see if you stay grounded or if you become reactive and insecure. Confidence, in this context, isn't about being loud or dominant. It's about emotional control. If a simple comment throws you off, makes you defensive, or pushes you into over-explaining yourself, it signals that your confidence is fragile. That's what lowers attraction. A common mistake men make is trying to win these moments. They argue harder, try to prove themselves, or seek validation by explaining their point in detail. This shifts the dynamic. Instead of appearing strong and composed, they come across as needing approval. What actually works is staying calm and unaffected. You don't take everything personally. You don't rush to defend yourself. You respond with ease, sometimes even with humor, showing that her words don't control your emotional state. Another form of testing comes through boundaries. She might cancel plans, show up late, or slightly disrespect your time to see how you handle it. If you tolerate everything without standards, it communicates that you don't value yourself enough to be taken seriously. At the same time, overreacting or becoming aggressive also works against you. Confidence sits in the middle, calm, clear, and firm. You acknowledge the behavior without losing composure. These tests are less about what she says and more about how you handle yourself. She's not just listening to your words, she's reading your reactions, your tone, and your ability to stay centered. When you pass these moments without needing to prove anything, it builds attraction because it shows emotional strength, and emotional strength is what creates a sense of security and intrigue at the same time. When a woman is attracted to you, her behavior doesn't always follow a straight, predictable pattern. One day she's engaged, responsive, and warm. The next day she seems distant, slower to reply, or less expressive. This inconsistency confuses a lot of men, and they often interpret it as a loss of interest. In many cases, it's not. Attraction can create internal tension. On one side, she feels drawn toward you. On the other, she may be trying to maintain emotional control, protect herself, or avoid appearing too invested too quickly. That push and pull shows up as inconsistent behavior. When she's leaning in, you'll feel the effort. Conversations flow easily, she's present, and her energy is open. Then something shifts. She pulls back, becomes less available, or creates a bit of space. That shift is often her way of regulating how much she's giving, especially if she feels the connection is getting stronger. Many men react to this by chasing harder. They double text, ask what's wrong, or try to pull her back into the same level of engagement. That reaction usually backfires because it removes the space she was trying to create. Instead of allowing the dynamic to breathe, it adds pressure. Inconsistency doesn't always mean disinterest. It often means she's thinking about you more than she's fully comfortable with. She's trying to balance her attraction with her need to stay in control of her emotions. That's why the shifts can feel sudden and unexplained. Another factor is emotional pacing. Not everyone moves at the same speed. She may genuinely enjoy the connection but need time to process it. Pulling back gives her that time without completely disconnecting. The key is to focus on patterns, not isolated moments. Anyone can have an off day or be less responsive at times. What matters is whether she continues to come back and re-engage. That return is what signals underlying interest. Staying steady in your own behavior is what keeps the dynamic balanced. When you don't react emotionally to her shifts, it removes pressure and allows attraction to build naturally. When a woman is attracted to you, her attention naturally sharpens. She starts picking up on details that most people overlook. This isn't something she forces. It happens because her mind is more focused on you than she openly admits. She might notice a small change in your appearance, like a haircut, the way you dress, or even subtle differences in your body language. These are things that don't stand out to everyone, but they stand out to her because she's paying closer attention than usual. That level of awareness reflects interest. It's not limited to physical changes. She may also pick up on shifts in your mood or energy. If you're quieter than usual, more focused, or slightly off, she'll sense it and sometimes bring it up. That awareness shows that she's tuned into how you are, not just what you say. A lot of men underestimate this sign because it seems small. They expect attraction to show up in obvious ways, like compliments or direct statements. But noticing details is a quieter form of investment. It shows that you're on her radar more consistently than you might think. You may also see this in the way she remembers things. She recalls past conversations, small preferences, or things you mentioned casually. When she brings them up later, it's not random. It means those moments stayed with her. Another layer to this is comparison. When someone is paying attention to details, they're often mentally tracking changes over time. She's noticing patterns, how you act, how you present yourself, how consistent you are. This helps her build a clearer picture of who you are. The mistake some men make is brushing this off or not recognizing its meaning. They treat it as casual observation instead of seeing it as a sign of focused attention. In reality, people don't invest that level of awareness into someone they're indifferent toward. At the same time, it's important not to overreact or seek validation from it. When you stay grounded and don't make a big deal out of her noticing, it keeps the dynamic natural. The attention continues without pressure, and that allows attraction to grow in a steady, unforced way. When a woman is attracted to you, jealousy can show up in subtle, controlled ways. It's rarely obvious or openly expressed, especially in the early stages. Instead of directly saying she feels jealous, she manages it quietly while revealing it through small shifts in behavior. You might notice a change in her tone when other women come up in conversation. She may ask casual questions that seem harmless on the surface, but are actually meant to gather information. For example, she could ask who you were with, how you know someone, or make a light comment that carries underlying curiosity. The words may sound neutral, but the intention behind them is not. Sometimes she'll act indifferent, almost as if she doesn't care at all. That indifference is often controlled, not genuine. It's a way of protecting her position and avoiding vulnerability. Showing clear jealousy would mean admitting emotional investment, and that's something she may not be ready to reveal. Another sign is a slight shift in her energy. She may become a bit quieter, less playful, or slightly distant after noticing your interaction with someone else. It's not a dramatic reaction, but it's noticeable if you pay attention. These small changes often happen in real time, before she has fully processed her emotions. Jealousy in this form is less about insecurity and more about perceived competition. If she's attracted to you, she's naturally aware that other women could be interested as well. That awareness creates tension, and her response is to observe rather than confront. A common mistake men make is trying to trigger jealousy on purpose. They mention other women excessively or exaggerate situations to get a reaction. This usually backfires because it feels forced and lowers trust. Instead of increasing attraction, it creates distance. Another mistake is misreading her controlled behavior as lack of interest. Because she isn't openly expressive, it's easy to assume she doesn't care. In reality, the restraint is part of maintaining emotional control. Recognizing this sign requires paying attention to subtle shifts rather than obvious statements. When her behavior changes slightly in response to perceived competition, it shows that your presence carries weight in her emotional space. When a woman is attracted to you, one of the most confusing patterns you'll notice is that she opens up emotionally and then suddenly pulls back. One moment, she's sharing personal thoughts, talking about her life, or showing a deeper side of herself. Then, without warning, her energy shifts. She becomes quieter, less available, or more distant. This isn't random behavior, it's tied to emotional exposure. Opening up requires vulnerability, and vulnerability creates a temporary loss of control. When she shares something personal, she's allowing you to see beyond the surface. That moment builds connection, but it also makes her aware of how much she's investing. After that realization, she often pulls back to regain balance. It's a way of protecting herself from moving too fast or becoming too emotionally dependent. The pullback is not a rejection of you, it's a response to her own level of openness. Many men misinterpret this shift and react in ways that weaken attraction. They start asking what went wrong, seeking reassurance, or trying to force her back into the same level of connection. This creates pressure and disrupts the natural flow of the interaction. The key is understanding that emotional investment doesn't always move in a straight line. It comes in waves. She moves closer, then creates space, then moves closer again. This pattern allows her to process her feelings while maintaining a sense of control. Another layer to this behavior is trust. When she opens up, she's testing whether it's safe to do so. Your reaction matters. If you handle it calmly and don't overreact or make it overly intense, it signals that you can handle emotional depth without becoming unstable or overly attached. If, on the other hand, you treat her openness as a signal to immediately escalate the relationship or demand consistency, it can push her further away. She needs to feel that her vulnerability won't be used against her or turned into pressure. This push and pull dynamic often continues until she feels secure enough to maintain consistency. Until then, her pattern of investing emotionally and then pulling back reflects both attraction and self-protection happening at the same time. When a woman is attracted to you, your absence doesn't go unnoticed. In fact, it often reveals more about her interest than your presence does. When you're consistently available, always initiating, and constantly engaging, she doesn't have to feel the possibility of losing access to you. But when you step back, even slightly, her behavior can shift in a noticeable way. This doesn't mean disappearing to play games. It means naturally having your own life, priorities, and focus that don't revolve around her. When your attention is no longer constant, it creates space. That space allows her to feel the difference between having you around and not having you there. If she's attracted, she starts to close that gap. You might notice her reaching out more, initiating conversations, or putting in extra effort to keep the connection alive. The same person who is more passive when you are always present can become more engaged when your energy is less predictable. This reaction is rooted in perceived value. When something feels limited or less accessible, it becomes more important. Your absence introduces that sense of limitation. It's not about manipulating the situation. It's about not overextending yourself to the point where your presence loses impact. A common mistake is overcorrecting. Some men either stay constantly available or suddenly withdraw completely in an obvious way. Both extremes break the natural dynamic. Consistency in your own life is what matters, not sudden changes designed to get a reaction. Another mistake is expecting immediate results. Her response to your absence isn't always instant. Sometimes it builds over time as she gradually notices the shift and processes it. What matters is whether her effort increases when you're not filling all the space. This sign also highlights emotional independence. When you're not dependent on constant interaction, it changes how you're perceived. You come across as someone who chooses to engage, not someone who needs to. Her response to your absence reflects how much your presence actually matters to her. Attraction isn't something you chase, it's something you build through how you carry yourself, how you think, and how you manage your emotions. When you stop trying to force outcomes and start focusing on your standards, your purpose, and your self-respect, everything shifts. You're no longer reacting to her behavior, you're leading your own life. The truth is, the more emotionally independent you become, the more naturally attractive you are. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you're no longer seeking approval. If someone is drawn to you, they'll meet you halfway. If they're not, you don't lower your value to keep them. Your power is in your discipline, your boundaries, and your ability to walk away from anything that doesn't align with your worth. Focus on becoming someone who doesn't need validation to feel complete, and you'll stop chasing attention and start attracting respect.